we have an idea about firms. We know that firms are in the business of putting together inputs to make outputs. And they're going to sell those outputs. And what we want to talk about now is we want to talk about a behavioral rule, which basically says, what are these guys doing? Our behavioral rule is pretty simple. Firms want to maximize profits. And profits are the residual of revenues beyond cost. And we're going to write that down formally, but I want to take a moment to make sure we understand here. Right now we're talking about commercial entities, entities that are private firms trying to make profit to either give to the owners, be directly, sole proprietorships or partnerships, or they're corporate owners, the shareholders. But this works just the same for not-for-profits. Not-for-profits also have to worry about residuals over their costs. They have costs of production, they'll make some money, and what they want to do with that money is different. They're not going to go to somebody in terms of income. They're going to use it, for example, to subsidize a hospital. They're going to use it to subsidize education. There's all sorts of things they're going to do with it. But they're still in the business of trying to make sure they have enough residuals of revenue over cost so they can do their good and charitable things that's the reason they have not-for-profit status. So it's not that they have a different set of rules. It's just that they have a different use for that money. We're going to focus our attention here on companies that are commercial. They're going to use that money as profits. And so from now on, when we want to talk about profit, we're going to use some simplified notation for the word profit. We'll use the Greek symbol pi. So when you see the Greek symbol pi, that means profit. And profit is just the residual of total revenue minus total costs. Now, total revenue, we kind of looked at a demand curve, and we had an idea that on a typical demand curve, if this is output and this is price and this is the demand curve, firms could see that if they were charging a price of $7 and selling 2,000 units, their total revenue would just be price times quantity, which in this case would be 7 times 2,000, which would be 14,000, whatever the currency we're talking about. But we don't have anything like that for total cost. We haven't thought through this issue of total cost, and that's why we're looking at this module called the theory of the firm. We want to understand where costs come from. Well, we kind of know where costs come from. Costs come from producing things. Firms hire inputs or buy inputs. They don't hire, some firms don't hire, for example, containers that they're going to put their product in. They'll buy those, but they're still spending cash and resources. There's expenditures involved. That's where costs come from. You know, every now and then you think back to the old cartoons. Shoemaker wakes up in the morning and fairies have produced a whole bunch of shoes for him. We don't have production fairies. People actually have to pay cash to build things. Okay? And that's what we want to do, is figure out what's this look like. Before we go any farther, I want to talk a bit about the difference between what I call accounting profit, well, what economists call accounting profit, and economic profit. So let's think about this. I'll tell you a little story first, and then we'll quantify it. Suppose I told you that, you got a nice job, you're making, I don't know, let's say you're making a nice living, $70,000, working your way up the chain at your business. And you decide, you know what, I'm tired of this rat race. I'm going to buy a stainless steel hot dog cart and put it out on the corner of the street. So pick any street, Manhattan, San Francisco, Chicago, London, wherever. You're going to drop down one of these hot dog carts. Start making hot dogs. Sell them on the street. That's a good business. Now, at the end of the year, you have to do your taxes. You hire an accountant. The accountant comes and looks at everything. You got a really good accountant. The accountant takes track of all your costs, all your revenues. He's got even the fines you had to pay the policeman because you parked in the wrong spot one day and all the other things that happen in your business. And he says at the end, walks up and shakes your hand and says, I got to tell you, you're really a great guy, or you made $60,000 this year. Your net profit was $60,000. And you say, well, thanks a lot, thanks a lot. And in fact, the accountant, being a good accountant, reminds you, you have to report that on Schedule C of your IRS. That is the tax form, because the taxpayer wants to know how much income did you make. Your net profit is what you have on that. Accountant has provided you with all the revenue information to put on Schedule C and all the cost information to put on Schedule C for the year of tax authority. But something's beginning to nag you in the back of your head. And that something that's beginning to nag you is that you gave up a job making $70,000 to take a job making $60,000. Now, you may say, well, Larry, you know what? I'm my own boss. That's what I wanted all along. Well, let's put that aside for a moment. To an economist, remember what we did from the very beginning. We're thinking about resource allocation issues. We're thinking about who determines where funds are put in. We had that little torn old sheet about computer chip prices back in 1990. And we know what happened in that industry is that people put lots of money into the industry, they started moving in that industry, and they made lots of returns. Well, in this case, you're putting money into a hot dog industry that the market is telling you, you know, that's pretty good, but it looks like you'd be better off in that others. Somebody's willing to pay you $70,000 for your talent rather than $60,000 for putting it on the side. So to an economist, we take all of the costs that the accountant can bring up. We call those explicit costs, and we have to add in the opportunity costs. What could you have done in your next best line of business? It's incredibly important that we think about that. And so I'm going to put out some terminology here. I'm going to say that accounting profit is equal to total revenue minus total explicit costs. Economic profit, you might notice I didn't put any subscript there because this is an econ class, so we don't have to subscript that. If we got a pi there, that means econ, all right? We'll put the ACCI on there if we're talking about something other than economics. But right now, economic profit is equal to total revenue minus total explicit costs, everything your accountant told you when he or she added up all those costs, and those opportunity costs. What could you have been doing in your next best line of business? So economic profit for us is just total revenue minus total cost. But for us, this total cost includes opportunity cost. Economists will tell you that the good manager is the person who, when the accountant walks into the CEO's office and drops down the books and says, boss, even in this terrible climate we're having in the economy these days, this quarter we made $3 million profit. You did a great job. The accountant turns around and walks out. Good managers will ask the very first question, I know I made positive profits, and I know that's going to be reported in the paper, but the question is, what could I have done elsewhere? What if I just liquidated my assets and got out of making Twinkies and started making automobiles? What if I started figuring out new batteries? All these sorts of other possibilities. My assets are tied up into this production, and I made some positive profit. But I have to keep asking myself the question, was it really positive economic profit? If there's something out there that I could have made more profit than this, I'm going to have to report this positive profit to the government, and I'm going to pay taxes on it. But darn, I wish I had that over there. So, moving forward, our job is to figure out a way that allows us to understand what this graph looks like.